Brett Ridgway, Chief Business Officer. This is bringing back a item that we had for discussion last month at the work session. We split it into 2 items for this meeting. The earlier action item that we talked about in terms of being open to opportunities to convert dedicated lands into fee in lieu of funding opportunities. But part of your request and your direction from the last meeting was to talk about this specific proposal with some other additional context. And so I put together this single slide in Excel, of course, to address some of those questions. And so at the top half there, you'll see some of the typical needs that we face as a district in 8 kind of broad categories. To the right there, you'll see then sources, relevant or realistic, I should say, sources of funding to address those needs, and also kind of it is in kind of a priority sequence as well. So that was that was in response to one question about the in response to the proposal that is, suggesting and offering to invest funds in addition to the fee in lieu of for a central office facility. And that type of facility would end up here at this very bottom priority, and it does end up on that bottom priority every single year, and that's appropriate. And also then it's appropriate that it doesn't have a lot of opportunity for resources to be applied to that. So when we have a scenario like this that's being presented to us, it really would behoove us to consider that opportunity for what it presents. In the middle sections here, there's just some verbiage again discussing FCBC and really underscoring probably a couple of times here that FCBC, Falcon Community Builders for Classroom, is a volunteer entity. The participation into it is voluntary by these developers. So it becomes a good opportunity for collaboration, which means collaboration is necessary to make the most of that opportunity. And so when there's a request made to us like they have done that, it's good for us to hear that and recognize that that they are valuable partners to us, and so that request needs some serious consideration. One of the requests also was to say, what else could be done with this. And so in the beginning of this last period here, or last paragraph, I mean, you just take some simple, scenarios. What could $2.5 million buy? Well, yes, it definitely could buy a lot of things if we were just to use that specific $2.5 million. It could buy, as I say here, 25 buses. It could replace, a mod or pod facility, maybe 2. It could do some roofing. A lot of these things are things that we are higher on our list, and we have regular opportunities for that on an annual basis. And so not that there wouldn't ever be a current need for that, but again, we have opportunities and resources more regularly available for that type of scenario. So that, I believe, is kind of the key points I wanted to highlight in terms of the slide. If you guys have read it in more detail, be interested in what your comments and next step suggestions are.
Okay, so to recap this, because I think this is pretty technical and we know what he's talking about, but folks who are watching or maybe sitting here don't necessarily, is that we talked earlier about being able to sell land and collect as a version of fee in lieu of land from the developers. Now the question becomes, when we get those funds, what do we invest them in? And so an opportunity has been presented where the Falcon Community Builders for Classrooms, which is an organization that controls where it puts its money. Developers contribute a per house amount to it on a voluntary basis, and then they decide as a group how they would like to invest that in our school district. It has to be for capital gain, some type of a capital project, but it doesn't necessarily have to be for classrooms. They have come to us and said that if we use fee in lieu of land monies from the sale of a couple of parcels that the developers are interested in, that we know that we most likely cannot use or would not be wise for us to use, that they would be willing to provide a certain amount of funds in addition to be able to build a facility to replace the Frankenstein facility we're meeting in right now. Those of you who drove up today, you may see we're tearing down a modular that's outside of this building. That's not because we don't need that space. It's because it became uninhabitable. So we're getting to the point in this building where the core building structure is pretty small, and we have offices and a variety of modulars that are connected in random ways to this building that are in various disrepair, because this facility will always be the last one we invest in terms of all of those other options, because we don't have students here. And so the question before us becomes, do we consider pursuing that option, knowing that we would be taking the fee in lieu of service money and then pairing it with money provided by Falcon Community Builders for Classrooms to build a separate facility for our central office personnel that would be more modern, that could have larger space, because as you saw tonight, we had one item on the agenda that folks were really interested in and the room was full. Imagine what happens if we have two, or on when we have our sessions before the board meeting where we our D49, fantastic 49, there we go, you can tell I'm tired. When we have a variety of students or teachers that we're honoring and folks want to come out and support that, they're literally standing outside the hall and taking turns coming in to see their child receive an award or to see their family member recognized for doing something excellent. And so we don't even have a facility that can house all of you who want to attend when there's an agenda item that is of importance to our community. And so our discussion at this point is whether we should be thinking about asking our staff to continue that discussion with the developers and Falcon Community Builders for Classrooms to see if we can come up with something reasonable that would pair a donation with this money. If we choose to do something else with that fee in lieu of service money, we don't get the donation. Okay, so they are saying we are willing to do a directed donation to a facility built to replace this, because it also has marketing implications for them when they're selling homes. If they say, yep, and there's the central office for your district, the facility speaks to what people think they may be getting as a service. So for them, market wise, they're saying this is something we want to see improved. So that's the proposal before us, is to consider whether or not to do that. And we asked Brett to provide more information about what our funding options were to make sure that we were doing something wise. So with that, questions, folks?
More comments. I thank you for giving us some options. Looking at that and reading through everything and talking about it with community members, it is an opportunity that we would be losing out on if we did not pursue accepting FCBC's generous offer to help us with a new central office. While there are other needs, I do believe that this is an opportunity for us to respectfully work with FCBC and their generosity and help our district in another way. So I'm very thankful to them. I'm thankful for you working with them on their board and bringing this opportunity to us. So thank you very much. And I am in full support of this. And I really hope it comes through for our district as a whole.
Thank you.
Any further conversation from FCBC based upon from 2 weeks ago? Anything that they feedback wise or anything that
They have not had an opportunity to meet again, and really it would be better for us to have had this conversation too. So so I have something more tangible to bring back to them in terms of what your openness, your willingness, your intent would be in order to have that conversation with them. So.
Here's the thought too, just because we've done it in regards to transportation most recently in terms of community feedback, something where we could put that opportunity out to our community in some sort of way in terms of that they have about this thought process and how it's going, especially when it's not using any taxpayer monies for those specific things like mill levy override or current capital things, that right. This is sort of in addition to everything else and would be a way of which funding something that was not necessarily in trouble yet, but is something there that could be something we could possibly work or something where we could put those feelers out to our community saying, hey, what do you all think about this? What's this?
Right.
Let you know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think one of the things to emphasize too is that this is not we're presenting this now so that if it were to pursue this, this is a long-term thing. This is a long-term project. Even we're not saying that we're going to be breaking ground anytime soon. It probably, we got a lot of stuff already on the plate. Those are all going to take first priority. This is a couple of years down the road, in all likelihood at the soonest. So that would give us, lots of time to get some of that feedback, because then there's even questions about where to do that type of work, and then what the design of it and things like that. So, so taking this as a very good intentional step-by-step process, this is that first initial step.
Yeah, and I would definitely say from the transparency part of that, I don't want somebody to say, hey, how'd that building suddenly arrive there? And how do we have a new education service center? How'd that happen?
Yeah, there's not going to be any suddenness to it.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah.
But just so that we're above board from the beginning, that we don't
Yeah.
just suddenly say, a month away from groundbreaking or a year away from groundbreaking, everybody knows.
Yeah, I'm a pure I'm a financial guy first at heart, right? And so, being able to take $2.5 million and get a good return on that right away, without a long-term investment type of thing, this is a good return on investment opportunity. So
I also see this one as we talk about the best choice for to learn, work, and lead. This would be an opportunity for acknowledging to our employees on a district level of, hey, we care about you, and having a facility that's not in trouble.
Well, and that can even fit everybody, right? I mean, part of the problem for some of our administrative staff is that they're spread in every nook and cranny that we can find a space, right? So they may need to predominantly meet with each other, but they've got to drive across district because each person's office is in some random space somewhere where we could find a cubby hole, essentially. And that may be, I don't think that's too much of a stretch, given the number of buildings I know that I've had to go to for a variety of things. And so that's less efficient too. And if we're paying them mileage, we're paying for them to drive from a facility on Constitution out to here several times a week, probably sometimes even a couple times a day, to do their work. And that doesn't use them efficiently or effectively and costs us more too. So I think it would be important to work with Matt's team to figure out timing on when we start, because we're obviously talking about this in a public meeting right now. So this is public information that's out there. Conversations will start depending on what people are hearing. Certainly if people know that land was supposed to be a school, and we say, yes, we're gonna go through with this, and we accept the money, even if we're not building till 2 years down the road, people are gonna know something happened to that land, right? So we want to make sure that we're thinking through the communication strategy. And so I would appreciate you working with Matt to figure out what appropriate timing is on different pieces of this. Personally, I think this is the right thing to do with this funding at this time. But given that we also know that this is going to be a recurring scenario in a district, it's not going to be an every week, month, or year thing, but looking at the amount of land we have in the district, the number of developments going through, there will be other opportunities where we're looking at fee in lieu of land. Certainly with some of the small developments, even we prefer to do that because the amount of land they have to give us is so small. So I think it would be a good idea to be working on a process for determining how those funds are handled. And I don't know if that means eventually a policy or regulation, but I'd rather be proactive on that. Something that gives, here's a direction for how we prioritize how these funds that are separate from taxpayer revenue are allocated. Because I think that will help us in the long run so that we're not continually making one-off decisions. Decisions that we make in a one-off way tend not to be, if we continue to follow that pattern, tend not to serve us well in the long term. And so I think it would be important for us as we're moving forward to this in parallel to also develop a more proactive process for how we're going to identify what are appropriate priorities. Just like we prioritize our regular capital funds and say, here's our policy for how we prioritize our capital budget.
Right.
There's probably a way to do that with this, because one thing that seems to me would be on the top priority is something that we don't have, that doesn't have access to some of these other funding streams like this project, or has less access. Like mill levy override can be used for a lot of things, but it can't be used to replace our transportation fleet. So figuring out how that needs to be prioritized in a way that makes sense would provide staff guidance and provide board more information as we go through this. And I think that would be a smart thing. I'm one person, I don't know, because that's work. So I'm pretty sure he would be directing some other folks to, and that's, to be clear, I'm not expecting that to show up in the next month or two either.
Right. Yeah.
But I think in parallel as we're working on this, that's an important conversation to have. I know I've heard it from another board member who's not here too. Kevin had said something to me about we need to make sure we think through being proactive. And I was like, yeah, coming up with policy and process is what we're supposed to be doing. So
Yes.
that would be my feedback on this as well. What else do you need from us directionally right now?
So just to clearly restate that you are in support of me having that conversation, continuing that conversation down the road with FCBC and the developers that are interested in this project.
Yes.
And bringing then a proposal to you with
Yes.
greater specifics. Okay. And
Yes.
then we will separately, because Melissa's still here, she's hearing this.
Yes.
We will work on that kind of criteria in terms of process that will kind of be parallel to regular capital prioritization and funding priorities. But this is another piece of funding. You're right that deserves some specific coordination like that. And just to be clear to everyone, when we have these monies that we do collect, these are isolated into their own funds. They don't get commingled with other funding programs at all. So there's always a lot of clarity and a lot of isolation for those monies. So
Yeah, because we all know there are some things that just continually get bumped to the bottom. And some of those things, this may be the right access funding stream for
Right.
capital improvement.
Right.
And then the third tier was working with Matt on communications, because there may be pieces of this that we need to start now and pieces that then follow. But I think getting some of that community and some of that conversation going
and
sooner
awareness
rather than later will help.
Mhm.
Because
Okay.
as they said, we don't want the 60% who aren't in our schools to look at that land get sold and then a year from now see the other building go up and say, wait a minute, you weren't supposed to spend that on anything but schools. We want to make sure that there's a really clear understanding well before we are ever doing anything with it, that folks know that this is a separate, that there is no, there is nothing coming from any of our mill levy funds involved in this project.
All right, very good.
And
Thank
not because we don't value everyone, but because we're trying to make sure we are very explicitly transparent on how we use, that we stay true to the intent and the spirit of what we promised our taxpayers.
you. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much for your work on this, Brett.